Good morning, class.
Good morning, Mrs. Wilson.
It's time for What Did the White House Teach Us This Week? With quotes. Now, remember to speak clearly and enunciate. Ready? For vocabulary, repeat after me. The White House is a real dump.
The White House is a real dump.
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 Excellent! Now, synonyms. I see all these politicians, and I see the swamp, and it's not a good place. In fact, today, I said we ought to change it from the word swamp to the word cesspool. So repeat after me. Cesspool.
Cesspool.
Very good. Now, Mr. Scaramucci worked at the White House for 10 days. Can you count to 10?
1, 2, 3.
Okay, that's good for now. For the White House, 10 is a very big number. Now, psychology. Reince is a fucking paranoid schizophrenic. Can you say that?
Fucking.
Moving on. Biology. I'm not Steve Bannon. I'm not trying to suck my own cock.
I'm not Steve Bannon. I'm not trying.
It's time for Forward Nation Radio. Now here he is, the host of Forward Nation Radio, David Leventhal.
Good afternoon and welcome to Forward Nation Radio. Thanks as always for joining us. On today's show, we're going to discuss the news, briefly we hope, and then we're going to finish and summarize our discussion of what Trump has wrought thus far. Starting off with the news. Gee, where do we start? This might blow your mind a little bit. Let's start with Russia. What we thought was going to be the latest breaking news on Russia was Trump's writing his son's false letter about the meeting that they had, which at this point, pretty much everybody has lied about every time anybody's opened their mouths. Well, that was yesterday's news. Literally yesterday's news. Things happen real fast in this White House. And turns out we've gone from collusion to now obstruction of justice. Trump writing his son's letter, his remarks that were false, that were lies, that misdescribed the meeting, despite what the huckster says after the fact. What a surprise there. Turns out Trump was involved. He knew a lot more than anyone said. This keeps getting closer and closer and closer to the president himself and is in fact surrounding him. But as we indicated, that was yesterday's news, that the president was giving a case for obstruction of justice. Today's news is more on obstruction of justice. Turns out, if you haven't heard this yet, it's a little bit of a story on a Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee staffer named Seth Rich, who tragically was murdered several months ago. And that led to an opportunity for Wikileaks and Fox News to try to change the subject from the Russia investigation. And it turns out they made up out of whole cloth a story about Seth Rich being the leaker of Hillary Clinton's emails to Wikileaks, and therefore wasn't Russia behind all this, etc. Well, it turns out on this one as well, not only was Fox News brandishing the lies, but it turns out the President of the United States, apparently, and allegedly, was behind Fox News' effort to spread this false story to try to change the subject from Russia's meddling in our election. You know, Fox News and President Trump, those huge patriots, putting the rich family through this misery. They apparently were absolutely unaware of what they were dealing with and the way they were being used as pawns to try to change the subject. This news was just coming out. Well, actually, it's a few hours. We've been in the studio for a little while. It took me a few minutes to walk to the studio. So I'm not sure what the latest breaking news on Russia is. It's really hard to keep up as the stuff flies off the presses faster than I can keep up with it. Before that, and now this seems like ancient news, but yes, it was still within this past week, was Trump unloading on his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, leading to Republican pushback, rallying around Sessions. Now, what's the issue here with Sessions? It's kind of comical in the first place. First of all, Sessions has been Trump's most loyal backer. So why is he picking on this guy? Second of all, as people point out, and we'll get to a little bit later when we discuss what Trump has wrought, Sessions arguably has accomplished more to promote the Trump agenda than anybody else has. So why is Trump going after Sessions? Well, he's going after Sessions because of his recusal, as we pointed out last week, his recusal from the Russia investigation, which he had no choice but to do, and the fact that it led to a special counsel. Is Trump going to fire Bob Mueller? It's remarkable that this story started out and all the pundits said not a chance. He'd have to be insane. And now increasingly it's looking like the whole situation is being set up so somehow he could fire Bob Mueller. Now, would that make him insane? Well, of course, as we've come to learn in the first few months of the Trump administration, he probably is insane, certifiable, insane. So there's that. But there also is another explanation for why Trump would prompt such a tremendous constitutional crisis in this way. And that, of course, is not necessarily just that he's insane. It's that he understands the extent of the criminal conduct he has been engaged in over the last months and years. And he knows that this is going to end badly for him, this investigation. And while it's potentially political suicide to fire the independent special counsel, it might be bigger suicide not to. Is it political suicide? He's counting on Republicans to have his back no matter what he does, no matter what else happens. Also, during the week, the mooch. Well, right before we went to show last week, the mooch was hired. The guy referred to as Mini-Me for how much alike he was to Donald Trump. The mooch was hired, and this week, the mooch was unceremoniously fired. Despite his war on leakers, which is what he was there for. So the mooch is gone because Trump brought in a new chief of staff. The mooch is gone, but only after Reince Priebus was gone, and chaos is reigning in the White House. This is a term that's now increasingly being used to refer to the White House, the administration, the leadership of this country. Chaos. So John Kelly was moved over from Homeland Security to be chief of staff with the hope that with his military background, he will bring some real order to the West Wing. I hope he brought some duct tape and a way to take Donald Trump's phone away from him as well. This story's never going to stop. They're never going to be able to tamp this down because they are dealing with a child in the White House and, more apparently, a criminal in the White House. So, also during the week, let's go back to health care. This one just refuses to go away. Good news, the bill that was brought back by the Senate in some real soap opera fashion was ultimately defeated. A bill that was described as terrible policy, a disaster, a fraud by Lindsey Graham, lost by one vote. That vote not belonging to Lindsey Graham, by the way, who climbed on board and supported the policy, voted for the policy that he had described as terrible, disaster, and fraud. John McCain, who we harangued about a little bit last week, came through in the end, provided the decisive vote. It's some real public theater. Also voting for the bill was Senator Shelley Moore Capito, who we've discussed over the last few years, who apparently had decided that, in fact, she was sent to Washington to hurt people, voting for the bill. So what the hell is going on with the health care bill other than with any luck? It is dead, despite Donald Trump's efforts to resurrect it. Did John McCain shock everybody by switching sides at the last minute? I think it's probably a little bit more complicated, and I think the way Washington works is probably illustrative here, and in fact, what the Republican Party is dealing with is really important here. My bet would be that the Republicans who did not want to see this bill pass, including presumably Lindsey Graham, Shelley Moore Capito, and others, got together and said, look, we've got Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins as solid no votes. We need a third. We need someone to go out and stop this bill from happening. Everybody knows the bill's a bad idea, except for one group. And that is the kind of moron who votes in Republican primaries, the Fox News watching, Breitbart reading jackass who would punish any senator who voted against this bill. So all these senators who were afraid of getting out crazied on the right said, what are we going to do? Well, let's have John McCain do it. He'll take one for the team. Due to John McCain's brain tumor and his age, he does not have to worry, presumably, about being primaried by the right in his next election, as he did in his most recent election, and had to cover his right flank. So he could be the one who takes the hit for the team. Since then, Trump, in a fit of childish pique, for which he is famous, has vowed to destroy the health care bill, to destroy Obamacare, the current health care bill that he's been against, leading Senate Republicans to have to come out basically and say, look, the bill is dead. Sorry. We're going to have to try to shore it up and fix the problems that the bill has had. We're going to assure the insurance companies that we will continue the subsidies, which have chased them out of the concern for which has chased them out of some markets. In other words, directly taking on their fearless leader. Trump's promise is to undermine the bill and destroy Obamacare. Millions of people would be left without insurance, or unable to afford insurance, and ultimately dead. Whatever, not his problem. He wants a win under his belt. There was, some of you may have missed this one, there was a recent Yale study that was reported in the Times and elsewhere that indicated how costs are shooting up in many emergency rooms across America, hospital emergency rooms. What's been happening is that a lot of hospitals have been outsourcing their emergency room staffing, including their doctors, to several private companies, including one company called MCare, which has been taking over hospital emergency rooms across America. And it turns out, the study indicates that every time MCare takes over a hospital emergency room, costs go through the roof, admissions go through the roof. There is a race to the bottom. hurting healthcare, raising costs, but giving more money to the doctors who work in that network and to the private company rewarding their shareholders. This is the kind of thing that a sensible government, a functioning government, would be talking about when it comes to fixing healthcare. This is something that could be fixed through regulations. One of the things that this company does, some of you may have experienced this. I know many people who have. You go to the emergency room because the particular emergency room is covered. You ask for your doctor. Every doctor is covered by your health insurance plan. But this private company then brings in several doctors who are not part of your insurance plan and ultimately send you huge bills. One person cited in the Times article had a doctor come in and basically say, "Hello, how you doing?" walk out and send a bill for hundreds of dollars to the patient, not covered by insurance. So patients are being screwed by this policy of going to out-of-network, not covered doctors. This is something we could be fixing for the benefit of human beings. This is presumably the kind of thing that certainly is not on the Trump agenda and has not been on the Republican agenda up until now. Maybe this spectacular failure will lead more Republicans to say, let's actually worry about fixing the healthcare system and not winning points. And lastly in the news, big news for Donald Trump. The company Foxconn has announced that it will be opening up a plant in Wisconsin to employ 3,000 people initially. Great news, jobs coming back to America, especially from Foxconn, where we can be really hopeful about the kind of jobs that are going to go back. Foxconn, some of you may recall, is a company that had been building Apple products, some of the products that go into Apple iPhone in China. The company's labor practices have been so notorious that they had to, in their factory, build safety netting because of all the workers that were jumping off high roofs and high platforms to kill themselves because of the working conditions. Well, the good news is they're coming to Wisconsin and they're opening up a factory there. Apparently, it only costs Wisconsin taxpayers about $3 billion to bribe the company into opening there so that Donald Trump has a victory. Other names in Wisconsin? Well, it will be opening in Paul Ryan's district. Speaker Paul Ryan. There's a victory. Look what I've done for people in my district. Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, he of political fame, are all going to benefit from this. The fourth largest incentive package in history for a factory that will be employing about 3,000 people. Extraordinary sum, according to experts both on the left and the right, who say the sum is unjustified. One analyst described it as a gift from Wisconsin taxpayers to Foxconn shareholders. Once again, take money from the poor and give it to the rich. The company approached Trump with this brilliant idea. Said that they could locate in Wisconsin, Michigan, or Ohio, for instance. Do any of those names sound familiar? You might recognize them as states, but you also might recognize them as the swing states, where Donald Trump eked out slight victories to give him the Electoral College win in 2016. So here's the deal. Let's go to Republican leaders and the President of the United States and said, hey, I have a great idea. You could give us a lot of money, and in return, we will give you a real political victory because the people who vote for you are too stupid to understand the price with which these few jobs were bought. And the only thing that you have to give up is you're going to have to screw over people who are too ignorant to understand how much you're screwing them over. All right, we're going to try something a little different this week because we have so much that we want to cover with respect to what Trump has wrought and created for America that we're going to fold a lot of the other news that's come out this week into our discussion of our main topic. So let's talk about what the Trump administration has accomplished so far. Let's start with making America great again. You know, some of us were concerned when Trump became the president, or even when he was running for president. And we said, this is going to be the leader of the free world. as previously reported on this show, we needn't have worried so much. Because as soon as Trump became the president, the United States was no longer the leader of the free world. This is becoming more and more apparent every day. Polls across the rest of the world show Donald Trump's approval ratings even lower than they are in America. I guess there aren't enough people watching Fox News in France and Britain and wherever else where they can remain that ignorant to still support this jackass and this administration. But it's not just the people in these other countries. The leaders of these countries have basically said enough with Donald Trump. Leader of the free world, look perhaps to Angela Merkel. When it comes to many international policies, Donald Trump has been supplanted by Jerry Brown, the governor of California, who apparently has more sway in many places than Donald Trump does. Still, we should be worried because we may not be leading the free world anymore. We may not even be following the free world anymore, but we still have a lot of nuclear weapons. And we're at the point where the President of the United States has to, or people in high command for the President of the United States, had to be asked by reporters. Recently, the commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet had to answer a question whether he would follow orders to order a nuclear strike on China from the President of the United States. In other words, people with their actual fingers on the nuclear button are being asked, would you actually do this if this lunatic tells you to start a nuclear war, basically ending the planet as we know it? His comforting response? Yeah, he's the commander-in-chief. I have to follow orders. That's inspiring. Let's hope when push came to shove and he wasn't just being asked the question, the answer would be different. Foreign relations, our lack of leadership of the free world. We've talked a lot about Israel in this show. We certainly talk a lot about it in America, especially in Republican circles. Not so good for Israel that the United States is not leading the free world. Not so good for Israel that we're turning over their intelligence secrets as well. You got to figure there's some buyer's remorse there. No, instead of leading the free world, we have embraced autocrats and repelled our Western democratic allies. Okay, Donald Trump promised to drain the swamp. And to a large extent, he has done so and drained it, as we've pointed out, right into his cabinet. He has filled the government with corporate executives, and he has filled our government with people requiring ethical waivers to do what they are doing. There is a reason they need ethical waivers, because ethically they shouldn't be doing what they're doing. And under the law, they wouldn't be able to do what they're doing. Pointing out again that the Department of Justice corporate ethics watchdog recently quit, saying, I can't work on corporate ethics when I look around at the administration and say, they're not even following these practices here in our own government. They found a new corporate ethics watchdog, probably to replace him, who doesn't seem to have any concern about ethics. Perfect for this administration. Corey Lewandowski, you might remember, ultimately put on the persona non grata list, at least apparently, when he assaulted a reporter on camera and then lied about it. But that's okay. Neither of those things really gets you on the outs with the Trump administration. He's back in. He's had to give up lobbying. So what's he doing? He's lobbying. Oh, I'm sorry. He's consulting. Not registering as a lobbyist, doing basically everything he did before, so he can enrich himself at the expense of the American public. Under the EPA, Scott Pruett, the administrator, there's an article recently publicized, a company called Devon Energy, and the rollback of environmental rules under Scott Pruett, who has an interest in that company and has been profiting from it. Throughout his government, you have people running agencies so that they could profit from that situation. Even where there's not obvious personal gain, he has handed government agencies, such as the EPA, to fervent opponents of those agencies, to lobbyists who are opposed to the very mission of those agencies. The most recent news on this was this week, came out, that Donald Trump's two top financial nominees this week. One to regulate the banks, the other as the controller of the currency, are against bank regulations. Bank regulations. Why do we need to regulate the banks? What could possibly go wrong if we don't regulate the banks? Well, it turns out there's a conflict there. And it turns out that Joseph Otting, who's been nominated to be comptroller of the currency, has perjured himself regarding his prior job running One West Bank, which had been criminally indicted for robo-signing, throwing people out of their homes by signing documents, legal documents, and introducing them at court, saying that they had the required mortgage documents, and they did not. He perjured himself regarding One West's history of robo-signing, as did Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. So what do you do when you've got a criminal perjuring himself about throwing people out of their homes? Simple. You give him a top job in the administration, of course. When we're not filling it with lobbyists, we have nepotism. The rich, incompetence, banana republic stuff. He's filled the administration with his own family members, at least until they get indicted and have to leave. But this is basically banana republic stuff. The president names his son, his son-in-law, his daughter to different posts to run the country. His friends. What is it that gets you a high position, a position of responsibility in the Trump White House? You're related to Donald Trump? Or you say nice things about Donald Trump? Actually, I assume it's both. We're trying to privatize the Iraq war now because there's more money to be made by private companies. Who's a billionaire from private wars? Eric Prince, who we've talked about before, who figures to make a lot more money if we privatize the Iraq war. Who's Eric Prince? Just the brother of our current education secretary. Banana Republic, anybody? Okay, what has the Trump administration done for democracy and voting in America as far as making America great? Well, we've talked before about the Voting Fraud Commission to address a fake problem so that Republicans could stop people from voting. Chris Kobach, the Kansas Secretary of State, who's been lying about voter fraud. The head of the commission, several other liars about voter fraud who's been prominent on Fox News are part of this commission. Abetting Republican efforts to disenfranchise voters. What is the result? Since 2010, 22 states, nearly all run by Republicans, have passed laws making it harder to vote. That makes sense if one believes that people are voting illegally. When one understands that people are not voting illegally, and the people they're stopping from voting are people of color who vote Democratic, that's a little bit more of a nefarious explanation. 2016 was the first election in half a century without the full protection of the Voting Rights Act, after the Supreme Court's infamous Shelby County decision eviscerating much of the Voting Rights Act. Immediately, as we've talked about before, states banded together to stop black people from voting for Democrats. An MIT study came out recently, was pointed out that in 2016, 12% of the electorate, 16 million people, encountered a problem in voting, be it long lines, difficult registering, faulty machines. For most Americans, we would think that's a bad thing. For the Republican Party, that's a prerequisite to political success, and therefore a good thing. Let's stop people from voting. The pace apparently is rapidly increasing in 2017, where already 99 bills in 31 states have been proposed or enacted to limit further access to the voting booth. This is criminal This is un-American, and we should be outraged by this. But if you watch Fox News, it's all about stopping voting fraud. Oh, by the way, what should the voting commission be working on? Well, we all know about Russian hacking and Russian trolling. Forget for a moment its ties to the White House. There's no question about this. They're not only doing it in America, by the way, they're currently now doing it in Germany after having moved on from France and Great Britain. We know that there are serious problems that all experts agree with hacking and trolling in our elections. And what has the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress promised to do about the real voting problem? The real potential catastrophe that this country faces? Absolutely nothing. Remember, they only have a chance to win election if 16 million or more find it hard to vote. Okay, let's talk about the Constitution, the backbone of America, the thing that Republicans especially, but we're all so proud of. Well, here's an area where I guess you could say there's something that Trump actually did. He got his Supreme Court pick in. A Supreme Court pick who will be sure to interpret the Constitution in a way that hurts Americans and benefits American rich people and American businesses. Okay, that's a difference in ideology. But let's be clear that to get his Supreme Court pick in, the Republicans in Congress had to violate the Constitution and not do their job in putting in Merrick Garland when Barack Obama, under the Constitution, duly nominated him. So his one pick, which Republicans will say is our way to promote the Constitution, at least as we see it, was only accomplished by a blatant violation of the Constitution. Other than that, he has declared war on the judiciary, declared war on Congress, our whole tripartite system of government. He's been attacking news and investigations. The idea of discrediting the news, independent news, facts. Physical violence. We've talked about the Montana congressman who got elected after he was assaulting a reporter for having the nerve to ask him a question. We didn't mention that he got $100,000 in contributions in the 24 hours after the video was released of him attacking a journalist. This is what we're unleashing in America. We've got the Trump ad about him attacking CNN people. Is his support of Russia, his trying to avoid the sanctions bill coming out of Congress. All part of undermining news, investigation, truth, and doing anything about it in favor of propaganda. He excludes the press from his press conferences, from his meetings. He invites the Russian press into the Oval Office when he meets with Russians, not the U.S. press. He describes the press as the enemy of the people. And he's sitting and mulling, firing Bob Mueller, and has already fired the head of the FBI investigating his Russia ties, all to cover this up. Keep looking for that sanctions bill. He's reduced civil rights protections. Now we get to the issue where people on the alt-right, the Breitbart News, the Steve Bannons, they really can stand up and celebrate what Trump has accomplished. And we get back to what feared many of us. This is about white supremacy. The Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department under Jeff Sessions is making it clear that they are running this country to promote the interests of heterosexual, generally wealthy, white males, and everybody else can go screw themselves. This is true with respect to voting rights, gay rights. Congress is currently opposing sexual orientation under Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which prevents discrimination on the basis of sex, to make sure that sexual orientation does not get in there. There is a lawsuit. The administration is on the other side of that one, arguing against it. The transgender in the military ban to protect the military, which Trump told us last week was done with long consultation with the military, and the military responded by saying, what is he talking about? We haven't had any discussion about this. He pulled this out of his ass, and we don't need this. Police reform. Donald Trump, speaking on Long Island, my backyard, came out and said to the police, you should not be too nice with these suspects you arrest. That's right. In this day and age, with people being beaten up and murdered by the police, people generally of color, what we need is the President of the United States going to rogue police officers and saying, basically, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, beat the shit out of them. Who cares? Jeff Sessions had to come out a few days later, gave a speech. You wonder if he's sort of getting back at Trump a little bit with this one. Gave a speech to the police and said, we thrive on good relations with our communities. Yeah, we're sure accomplishing that one. The immigration, throwing people out, beating the shit out of people of color, talking about not being too nice, which, by the way, the police have now come out and absolutely distanced themselves from. But it is instructive that at the time when Trump said it, he got a huge ovation and a polite response from the police officers that were there. But police departments, those who've been entered into consent decrees to try to get the violence and the racism out of their departments, were shuddering over this one. He's demeaned the office and the nation. Let's be clear on this. He's a contemptible human being, and he has made that abundantly clear. He is mean. He is petty. He is vindictive, even against people who support him. He is a child. The Boy Scouts organization had to come out and apologize to its own troops for the first time in history for the speech that they were forced to sit through by the President of the United States. He's a liar. He's a congenital liar, basically lies every time he opens his mouth, unless it's more convenient to say something that just so happens to be the truth. This is the way we have demeaned the office of the presidency of the United States. Say what you want about Obama, the guy was all class, especially compared to these lowlives. Promises kept. Well, on day one, he was going to indict China or recognize China as a currency manipulator. No, not that one. He was going to get rid of NAFTA. Nope, not that one. He was going to get rid of Obamacare and replace it with something better. Nope, not that one. He was going to have the wall built in Mexico. Was going to pay for it. Now we're defraying the cost of the wall by putting solar panels on it. That's great. He has promoted ignorance. Republican chic. Watch Fox News. Watch Fox and Friends. The President of the United States effectively tells the people of America to watch cartoons. I know the word. You are entitled to your own opinion, just not your own facts. Bullshit. You're not even entitled to your own opinion if you're a jackass and your opinion is uninformed and based on false fact. You're sure as hell not entitled to air your opinion, and sure as hell not entitled to have anybody listen to it. But this is where we are in America right now due to the triumph of Donald Trump and Fox News bullshit. Ignorance is de rigueur in America. He's been dismantling the regulatory state. Launched efforts to dismantle Dodd-Frank, the one financial regulation. We talked about that before. Agencies have been told that for any new regulation they want to enact, they need to take two away. A childish bit we've talked about before, which should be looked in light of the fact that this week the London police came out and indicated that there is reasonable grounds to suspect corporate manslaughter in the Grenfell Towers fire tragedy that's killed at least 80 people at this point. Do we really need less regulation? It's just been reported that the FDA has 6 inspectors, for instance, to test all foreign cosmetics. Hundreds of companies. We tested 0.3% last year, with 15 to 20% getting an adverse reaction. So you know how we respond to the fact that you're putting on your face cosmetics that are injuring you? Let's get rid of the inspectors so that you're not aware of the injury. If you ignore a problem, then maybe it will go away. Certainly your friends will be able to enrich themselves even more. The economy, there's been no Trump bounce. Turns out if you tell businesses they're not going to be regulated, they're not going to be taxed, the concern is still that they're not going to be able to get away with this forever. They're undermining Obama-era safety rules. We talked about last time about workers eligible for overtime pay and getting rid of that one. War on American workers, that's the way they boost the economy, by making shareholders, rich shareholders richer and workers poorer. There's an accomplishment there. Healthcare, well, we've already been down that road, but let's not leave out that they have lowered nutritional standards on school lunches. That figures to help education, as well as, I guess, lower healthcare costs when sick children don't get to go to a doctor if they eventually stop them from going to the doctor. Oh, how have they done with the environment? They filled the EPA with anti-environmentalists. Recently, this past week, nominated a coal lobbyist as EPA's deputy administrator. He's proposed deep cuts to environmental research and efforts to protect air and water. Cuts to the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health. This in light of recent evidence, studies showing how great the tick problem is becoming all across America, and how many diseases, some deadly, are being spread to children and others by ticks. So let's cut funding for the National Institutes of Health. Trump budget proposes a 31% EPA hit. 32,000 jobs will be lost. Dismissing scientists from the board of scientific counselors and replacing them with industry representatives who will be making sure that scientific decisions are being made for the benefits of corporations, not for the benefit of science or individuals. It was also reported this week, greater risk to waterways from fertilizer runoff. We need government to institute rules so that we're not destroying our waterways, which are now being filled with bigger dead spots, where nothing can live because of the amount of runoff and contamination. Some spots being bigger than large U.S. states. Pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement, just don't forget that one. Education, latest just came out. The Justice Department will be investigating and suing universities for discrimination against white people, because it's so hard to be white in America today. An anti-affirmative action. We will discuss affirmative action in a future show. But this is who our government is representing right now. The Education Department faces a 13.5% cut in spending because, after all, we are clearly spending too much on our schools, which, to fit their agenda, are no longer being called public schools by the right. They're being called government schools because that language sounds a lot better. Go back and check out our episode on reasoning fallacies. If you call it government schools, people are going to hate it. If you call it public schools, they may not do so. And immigration, well, we have accomplished a lot there. We've thrown innocent, hardworking people who've grown up in America and played by the rules. We're throwing them out, and we're scaring the shit out of everybody. Go back and revisit our discussion on police relations with the community. Yes, fewer people are trying to get into America, and presumably a lot more of us in the future are going to be trying to get the hell out. Okay, we went a little over today, but we did want to sum up the Trump administration's successes so far. Like looking forward, go to forwardnationradio.com. That's forwardnationradio.com and get the full experience. You'll see the video from this and every episode there and on our YouTube channel as well. Don't miss the next Forward Nation Radio podcast on Podbean at podbean.com. If you like what you heard, please like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, tell your friends, spread the word. Forward Nation Radio. Thanks for sitting through a long show this week. See you next week.
Forward Nation Radio with David Leventhal.